without further ado, we'll move on to our second provocateur and influencer, opinion leader, and really one of the most important and timely topics right at the moment. So, John, let's move on to talk briefly about the DMO funding project. We're calling it Funding Futures. This is a initial, relatively high-level view of what is an absolutely timely and critical issue, which is tourism funding and DMO funding. In this environment, with the impact of COVID-19, some of the analysis done by one of the partners in the research, Tourism Economics, has estimated that we're seeing over $500 billion decline in tourism spending in the US alone. And that 38% of all the jobs lost are directly related to tourism and hospitality. So it's been called by US travel the Great Travel Depression. That's got all sorts of implications. One of them is on funding to states, to counties, to cities, and of course to DMOs. And so with that as a backdrop, with Civitas advisors, we decided that it was timely and relevant, in fact, critical to have a look at the future of DMO funding and tourism funding, and what are some of the options and opportunities that this moment of crisis brings. So we're taking a look at this initial study. I'll pass over to John to provide sort of a brief introduction and overview of the study, and then I'll come back at the end and we'll talk about some of the critical sort of timelines. Before I do, I just want to acknowledge the great support we've received from US Travel Association's Destination Council. They've made a contribution towards the cost. We've also had additional in-kind support from Destinations International in terms of providing access to data and research, and Tourism Economics. Adam Sachs and the wonderful team there at Tourism Economics are also a great partner. All of us, three agency involved, are donating most of our time at no cost to this project, and the report will be freely available, and we'll be running a webinar. So more on that in a moment, but over to you, John, to provide an introduction.
Thank you so much, Chris. It's a pleasure to be joining you today. And as you know, here at Civitas, we spend a lot of time thinking about bringing increased, stable, dedicated funding to DMOs. And that's why we're so excited to be partnering with you and Miles Partnership on this very important funding study at a very important time. And Chris, you've given some general highlights. I'll go into a little bit more detail of what we're providing, and then talk about why this study is important now and what policy decisions do we hope to influence or impact from the results of this study. First and foremost, there is a significant tax component to this. We did a study, I think as most folks know, 2 years ago with US Travel Destination Council on looking at tax rates for 100 destinations around the country. As part of this study, we're going to be again partnering with the Destinations Council and updating all of that information. In addition, we're doing a series of focus groups with DMO leaders from throughout the country and Canada, asking them questions about what's happening to their funding now and what do they see happening as they go through the COVID crisis. In addition, we're doing some survey work and asking DMOs for their input on a number of issues related to funding, and asking them about models that are working well and models that they're having challenges with. So let me first talk about the tax portion of this, if I could, and I'll go ahead and see if I can take control of the clicker here. And this was the report that I referenced that we did 2 years ago, looking at 100 destinations. And we did two things with this. First, we looked at the tax rates in all of these places so that folks would know how much are they getting charged when folks are coming out of a hotel room, what is their charge at checkout, and also looking at F&B charges. In addition, as part of this study, we looked at the expenditure side. How was that money being used? Was it going into the general fund? Was it being used for tourism promotion? And to no surprise, 49% was going straight into the general fund, and less than 20% was specifically being used on tourism promotion. So one of the great things is we now can take that information and use it as a benchmark and see what's happened over time. And one of the things we're finding already in our study is that there are quite a few changes in the tax rates, even in only 2 years. In fact, over 20% of the destinations have increased their tax rates within that short two-year period. So that's just to give you a kind of a little sneak peek at what some of those data points are going to be. We're already finding that there were changes out there. The focus groups that we're doing with DMO leaders have been fantastic, and we included 3 quotes on this page of folks that are leaders within the industry. I think most folks know Gary Sherwin from Newport Beach, and Susie Santo from Wichita, and Kevin Kane from Memphis, but each had their own take on what's happening now. Certainly Gary talked about the fact that we are at an inflection point. This is an opportunity to take stock of where you are and look for opportunities for change. And I think he really highlighted that. And as a corollary, Susie talked about DMOs being nimble and being able to make changes now in this environment and how important that is. And finally, Kevin really talked about the industry, the importance of the industry, especially when so many hotels and our lodging partners, their marketing and their sales efforts have been cut back, that now DMOs are more important than ever, and that DMO funding is more important than ever. Some of the key takeaways that we've had so far from our focus groups include, number one, the importance of reserves. And this goes without saying. It's obvious, but I can't tell you how many DMOs I've talked to that don't have any reserves, that weren't allowed to keep reserves. And we really need to focus into the future on how do we set up a program that allows for significant reserves for DMOs for crises in the future. Second, that COVID-19 is an opportunity. While it has been devastating to our industry, our elected officials right now want to help our industry and want to help us. So now it is a good time to be thinking about policy decisions that you want to impact and you want changed. We heard a great deal about diversifying funding sources, and that one size fits all does not work. And obviously, DMOs play different roles in different destinations, and those funding sources have to match those roles. Our groups talked about the difficulty in obtaining outside funding, and certainly something we've been talking about for a couple years now was the impending reduction in budgets for cities and counties, even pre-COVID. And now with COVID, we're seeing significant declines in state and local governments. In fact, I think we've just seen the tip of the iceberg on that, and we're trying to work with DMOs to get us prepared for what's ahead of us as we can. When those budgets get short, we know what happens. There's additional pressure to cut tourism promotion funding. And finally, based on some of the great work that Amir's done and some of the great work that Jack Johnson has done at Destinations International, we're talking more about a community-centric approach, right? Our funding has been so tied to our key partners, the hotels, but we recognize that really we need to be tied not just to the hotels, but also to the community. The community needs to be our clients. We need to be thinking about the shared community values that we have and how we're returning benefits back to the community, and also what kind of funding for us can the community support in addition to the hotel funding sources. And finally, this is my last slide, Chris. I know we've been all sort of over webinared, right? So we wanted to really just keep this to the meat of the matter today as best we could. The question is, why are we doing this now? Why is this an important time? And I'll go back to what I mentioned before. Our elected and appointed officials want to help our industry. And so much of the recovery programs that we know right now all require funding, whether they're tax breaks, whether they're grants, whether they're loans, those all require funding. And if you can think of policy decisions that you can get now, it's an excellent time to be asking for it. Because they're short of money, the funding is always going to be difficult. But are there policy changes that we can make now that we can take advantage of this opportunity we have with folks that really want to help us? And if you look on this slide at my bullets, 1 and 3 here, taking advantage of the political climate, and it's a great time to talk to electeds about getting help, perhaps restructuring, perhaps looking at new tools. It really is an opportunity that won't be there forever, right? That window is open now, as we get into recovery, that window will start to close. And finally, I'm really excited about having a historical benchmark. When we got into our study 2 years ago, one of the things we found was there was a lot of inconsistency about the way funding had been studied in the past. And one of the things we attempted to do was create a standard, create something that we could use into the future so that we would have good benchmarks and we could see and track changes in funding and changes in taxes and changes in allocations over time. And that's exactly what we're embarking on now. And hopefully that will set us up for success in the future.
Thanks so much, John. And just a brief overview of some of the key deliverables and dates that will be coming up in this study. So over the next couple of weeks, starting next week, we're going to be sending out to the 100 cities and all 50 US states a survey that's going to ask some critical questions in addition to validating the tax information collected about their future plans with regards to exploring different revenue models or exploring different roles and responsibilities, such as maybe a more active involvement in destination management. We're also going to be issuing a discussion document and seeking feedback in the latter part of July to some of the high-level options and opportunities for new funding models. We are taking a brief look internationally, and that includes looking in particular, for example, at Europe and some of the new models, some of the outcome-based funding models they've been exploring. So we'll be sort of outlining a number of the options and seeking feedback on those. And then we're distilling all of the desk research, the survey research, the feedback to the discussion document into a public summary. We'll be running a webinar with US Travel and the Destination Council. You can see the date there, Thursday, August 20th. It's going to be at 2 o'clock Eastern. And we'll be issuing the sort of public summary findings and recommendations at that point. So hopefully it'll be a valuable contribution to this critical area, but there's got to be a lot more work done at individual cities, states, counties, etc. John briefly mentioned Canada. I know we've got a number of Canadian destinations on the webinar today, and we are exploring with DMAC, the Destination Marketing Association of Canada, and Destination Canada, the opportunity to involve Canadian destinations. And we should have more on that in the next week or so. So there's our contact details. Don't hesitate to reach out, and John will join us at the end for any questions in our remaining few minutes. Thank you so much, John.
Thank you, Chris. And I wanted to say not only thank you to you and your team, but to Miles Partnership for working on this. And I wanted to say a big thank you to all the DMOs out there too. They've really helped us. They've answered our emails, participated in our focus groups. We've got a survey going out. And I just want to say thank you to everybody who's on the line today for helping us gather this information so that we can advance the industry.
Well said, John. Thank you so much.